Hi friends. Please subscribe and help me get my first 1,000 subscribers. It's one click for you, but for me it's a huge encouragement and motivation. Thank you to everyone who has already subscribed. I hope you enjoy this story. Let us go. The morning sun filtered through the drawn white blinds, casting a soft hazy glow over the small kitchen where Hannah stood by the stove, absent-mindedly stirring a pot of steel-cut oats. Her hair was pulled up into a messy, chaotic bun, and her glasses, the thick-rimmed ones she only wore inside the apartment, slid slightly down her nose. It was their morning, quiet, routine, and seemingly perfect. Jake sat at the small dining table, hunched over his laptop. Beside him steamed a mug of black coffee, his non-negotiable morning ritual. "Hey, you seeing this?" Hannah lifted the wooden spoon, gesturing to the pot where the oatmeal had begun to bubble aggressively, threatening a hostile takeover of the stovetop. That exact moment you realize you completely forgot to turn the burner down. Jake chuckled, glancing up from his screen with a smirk. "If the oatmeal is not slightly scorched, is it really your oatmeal?" he teased. "Hey." She whipped a dish towel at him. "I am just trying to add some texture to your life, okay?" Jake caught the towel with one hand and laughed. These light, unscripted moments were the glue of their mornings. They knew each other's operating systems perfectly, her habit of abandoning half-full water glasses on every flat surface of the apartment, and his bizarre obsession with making itemized lists for absolutely everything. It was 5 years of small discoveries that had welded them into a solid unit. Over breakfast, the conversation shifted to the logistics of the evening. Hannah kept glancing at her planner, where the day was broken down into military-grade time slots, a Zoom call with the florist, a consultation with the DJ, and a final review of the invitation mock-ups. Jake nodded reservedly, well aware that for Hannah, this wedding had morphed from a celebration into the project of a lifetime. "I was thinking," Jake started, pushing his empty bowl aside. "Maybe tonight we just order a pizza from that deep dish place, crack a beer, and forget about the wedding to-do list for like 2 hours? Hannah looked at him over the rim of her glasses, her gaze a mix of affection and laser-focused intensity. "Jake, the wedding is in 2 months. This is going to be the most important day of our lives, and it needs to be flawless. To get there, we have to grind a little bit now." Jake chuckled and held up his hands in surrender. All right. Flowers, seating charts, whatever you need. You re the boss." Hannah walked over and wrapped her arms around his shoulders, pressing her cheek against his back. "You re the best. You know that, right?" He covered her hands with his own and closed his eyes for a second, soaking in the warmth of her touch. Her confidence, her relentless enthusiasm, it usually inspired him, even if lately it felt less like wedding planning and more like preparing for a tactical invasion. By evening, the living room of their Nashville apartment had been transformed into an improvised command center. Notebooks were scattered across the coffee table, Hannah's MacBook was balanced precariously on the arm of the sofa, and between them lay a graveyard of empty chip bags and chocolate wrappers. Jake sat cross-legged on the floor, organizing name cards for the reception. Hannah, wearing a look of intense concentration, spun her laptop around to show him a Pinterest board filled with floral arrangements. "Okay, these white roses with the lilies. What's the verdict?" she asked. They pretty?" Jake looked up, trying hard not to sound like he was just auto-generating a response. "Pretty? Jake, this is the biggest day of our lives. Pretty is not a valid descriptor." Okay, he raised his hands defensively. "They are elegant, classy, a total vibe." Hannah nodded, satisfied, and turned back to her screen. "Now that is the feedback I am looking for," she smiled. Jake sighed, picking up a card with the name Aunt Betty, and placing it next to his mother's card. Hannah immediately frowned, her radar pinging. "Jake, are you seriously putting your mom next to Aunt Betty? They start World War III over the dessert table." "You are exaggerating. It was one piece of cheesecake at the engagement party. What grown adult holds a grudge over cheesecake?" Hannah raised her eyebrows. "I will remind you of this conversation when someone flips the wedding cake." Jake laughed quietly, but to avoid a diplomatic crisis, he moved the cards apart. They worked late into the night, both slightly frayed around the edges but running on the adrenaline of anticipation. Before bed, Jake walked up to Hannah, wrapped his arms around her, and kissed the top of her head. You know, no matter what happens with the flowers or the seating chart, it is going to be the best day ever. Because I am marrying you, he said. Hannah smiled and leaned into his chest. And I am marrying you. That already makes it perfect. But as they climbed into bed, Jake noticed a flicker of a shadow in her eyes, as if something had been left unsaid. He almost asked, but decided not to pull at the thread. How could he have known that this tiny, insignificant loose thread would unravel everything? The next afternoon, Hannah sat on the couch, doom scrolling through her phone. The screen lit up with notifications from her group chat, a stream of messages that made her feel increasingly cornered. Her friend Vanessa, as usual, was the ringleader of the chaos. Vanessa, wait, are you seriously bailing on a bachelorette party? Hannah, you cannot do this. Claire, yeah, that breaks every rule in the book. You know the Bachelorette is sacred territory. Zoe, what kind of life is it without one last night of freedom? Hannah, you literally have to do this. Hannah sighed, staring at the endless sea of exclamation points. Her thumbs hovered over the keyboard, paralyzed. In her head, she could hear Jake's voice. Those parties are just trouble waiting to happen. She knew he was right, but the nagging feeling that she was disappointing her friends, that she was being the boring one, would not let go. A second later, her phone buzzed. Vanessa's name flashed on the screen. Hannah, Vanessa started without a hello, the moment Hannah picked up. Tell me this is some kind of sick joke. You are not seriously skipping your own bachelorette party? Vanessa, Jake and I decided it's just not our scene, Hannah said gently, trying to keep her voice steady. We do not want any drama right before the wedding. Drama. Vanessa scoffed loudly. It's not drama, Hannah. It's fun. You deserve at least one night to blow off steam and forget about all this stress and planning. Tell me the truth, is this actually your decision? Or did Jake decide for you? Hannah felt a knot tighten in her stomach. Vanessa's question hit a nerve. Was this her decision? Or had she just absorbed Jake's anxieties? We agreed on it together, she replied, trying to sound firm. It's just not what we need right now. Oh, come on, Hannah. Vanessa exclaimed. You see, I not live by the rules 24/7. What is the worst that could happen if you color outside the lines for once? Jake does not even have to know the details. It's just a bachelorette party. We are not flying to Vegas for a weekend bender. Hannah felt anxiety bubbling up in her chest. She knew Vanessa genuinely wanted her to have a good time, but her words felt less like an invitation and more like peer pressure. The next day, Vanessa demanded a face-to-face. They met at a coffee shop on the corner of their block, a place that always smelled like roasted beans and fresh cinnamon rolls. Vanessa, as usual, had arrived early and secured a corner table with 2 lattes already waiting. Here, she said, sliding a cup toward Hannah. We drink coffee, and then we have a serious talk about how you are about to sabotage your own wedding experience by skipping the Bachelorette. Vanessa, stop, Hannah tried to cut her off, but her friend held up a manicured hand, silencing her. Listen to me, Vanessa leaned in, her voice dropping an octave. I get that you love Jake. I am happy for you guys. But this is the last time you get to be truly free, to feel like the entire night belongs to you and only you. Do not you want that? Even a little bit? Hannah stayed silent. She did not know how to answer. Vanessa's pitch sounded seductive, but it ran directly counter to the promise she'd made to Jake. Be honest, Vanessa squinted, leaning even closer. Are you really sure you will not regret missing this? It's just one night, Vanessa. It will not change anything, Hannah said, though her voice lacked the conviction she desperately wanted to feel. Vanessa smirked and shook her head slowly. If you think that, then you are not listening. It's not just a night, Hannah. It's a symbol. It's a chance to celebrate you and your life before it changes forever. Vanessa's words were stuck in Hannah's head like a pebble in her shoe, irritating, persistent, and impossible to ignore. She tried to focus on her to-do list, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the conversation at the coffee shop. That evening, after Jake got home from work, she decided to float the idea, treading as carefully as if she were walking on thin ice. Jake, she started, pushing a piece of grilled chicken around her plate. What would you think if I actually did do something for a bachelorette? Nothing crazy. Just drinks with the girls, some conversation. Jake stopped his fork halfway to his mouth, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked across the table. Hannah, we already made a call on this, he said, a small frown crease appearing between his eyebrows. Those parties rarely stay, just drinks. And I really do not want anything to mess up our momentum right before the big day. It does not mean I am planning anything wild, she countered, her voice rising just a fraction. Just one night to decompress before the wedding madness peaks. Jake set his fork down with a deliberate clink and leaned forward. Are you sure this is coming from you? Or is Vanessa in your ear again? Hannah felt a flash of defensive anger spark in her chest. It does not matter where the idea came from, she said tight-lipped. I just want you to trust me. This is not about trust, Jake replied, his voice calm but unyielding, the lawyer in him coming out. It's about risk management and priorities. We have ground out 5 years to make this life and this day perfect. Why roll the dice now? Hannah did not answer. She could feel the invisible wall between them adding another layer of bricks. Jake might have been logical, but there was something about his absolute certainty that rubbed her the wrong way. That night, lying in the dark, Hannah stared up at the ceiling fan while Jake breathed rhythmically beside her, deep in sleep. Her phone screen lit up the nightstand with a new text from Vanessa. Vanessa, you need to do this. It's going to be the night of your life. Stop thinking about Jake. Start thinking about you. Hannah closed her eyes and gripped the phone tight. She could feel the collision course between her own buried desires and her commitment to Jake. She was ready to type no to shut it down, but a whisper of doubt had already set up camp in her chest. The rain started out of nowhere, a sudden Tennessee downpour that felt like the sky was being torn open. Fat drops hammered against the passenger window as Hannah sat there, nervously twisting her engagement ring. Vanessa, dressed in all black with a shade of lipstick that could stop traffic, merged onto the wet highway with aggressive confidence. Are you strictly sure this is a good idea? Hannah asked, realizing it was the 5th time she de-voiced the question in 10 minutes. Hannah, we covered this. Vanessa shot her a quick, sharp glance. It's going to be a blast. We are just going to blow off some steam. You need this. Hannah took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of Vanessa's expensive leather interior. Everything in her gut was screaming that this was a mistake. But her friend was too persuasive, her energy too infectious. It was just a bachelorette party, right? A few overpriced cocktails, some gossip, nothing that would cross the line. The car jerked to a stop in front of an older industrial-style building in the Gulch, illuminated by a muted violet neon sign that buzzed softly, the Velvet Room. Vanessa, I thought we were just hitting a bar or a nice restaurant. Hannah felt her stomach drop. Relax, Vanessa killed the engine and flashed a wide, predatory grin. This is not some dive bar. It's upscale. Classy. The perfect spot for a send-off. The heavy metal door was pushed open by Zoe, another one of Hannah's bridesmaids. Her smile was so wide it looked painful, and her gold sequin dress caught the neon light, making her look like a human disco ball. The star has arrived. Zoe shrieked, pulling Hannah into a hug that smelled of hairspray and excitement. Inside, the club was darker than Hannah had anticipated. The air was thick with the scent of mahogany, high-end cologne, and expensive liquor. A deep, thumping bass line vibrated through the floorboards, rattling her teeth. The rest of the squad was already gathered at a reserved booth. The table was littered with specialty cocktails, and a bottle of Veuve Clicquot sat chilling in a silver bucket in the center. There she is. The future Mrs. Claire yelled over the music, clapping her hands. Hannah slid into the leather booth, feeling the anxiety rise in her throat like bile. She stared at the champagne flute in front of her, trying to convince herself that this was just a harmless girls' night out. But she could not shake the creeping dread that the brakes had been cut on this particular vehicle. All right, ladies, Vanessa raised her glass high. To Hannah, and to her final night of liberty. The table cheered and raised their glasses. Hannah felt heat rush to her cheeks, but she lifted her glass along with them, clinking the crystal against theirs. An hour later, the sharp edges of her anxiety had started to blur. She was laughing, the champagne doing its work. The girls were swapping stories, taking blurry selfies with their drinks, and roasting the absurdity of wedding planning. It all seemed innocent enough until Vanessa stood up, cleared her throat, and announced loudly, "And now, time for the main event. Hannah froze, her smile faltering. What main event? She tensed up, her fingers gripping the stem of her glass a little too hard. Do not panic, it's just part of the experience, Vanessa winked, looking far too pleased with herself. In the next second, the ambient lighting dimmed further, and the music shifted from ambient house to a heavy, rhythmic R&B track. A door in the far corner swung open, and two men in impeccably tailored suits walked out. They looked polished, their movements smooth and predatory, their smiles practiced. "Oh my God, you guys," Hannah whispered, eyeing the men. A wave of embarrassment washed over her as the realization hit. "Oh yes, yes, yes." Vanessa grabbed her arm, shaking her. "Loosen up, it's just a show." One of the men, a tall blonde with the kind of walk that suggested he owned the building, headed straight for their booth. His eyes were locked on Hannah like a guided missile. "All right, ladies," he projected his voice over the music with a charming grin. "Who is the lucky lady tonight?" Vanessa pointed an accusatory finger right at Hannah. "Right here. The blushing bride." Hannah felt her face go nuclear. "Oh no, thank you, I do not really," she started to stammer, but the blonde was already there. He extended a hand, bypassed her protests, and pulled her smoothly to her feet and out onto the floor. The crowd around them started clapping and whistling. Hannah's heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She forced a nervous smile, trying to play along, though her hands were trembling slightly. The man began to move, his choreography sharp and professional. The group of friends screamed, cheering her on, egging her to participate. She relaxed a fraction, trying to sway to the beat. Suddenly, in a move she did not see coming, he swept her up into a lift, spinning her around. The room erupted in applause. When Hannah stumbled back to the booth, her legs felt like jelly and her heart was trying to escape her chest. That was... She started breathless, not sure how to finish the sentence. "Epic." Vanessa finished for her, refilling Hannah's flute before she could protest. Hours ticked by, and the night turned into a blur of neon lights and heavy beats. Hannah lost count of the cocktails. The room was spinning gently, and she felt her grip on reality loosening. Suddenly, Vanessa stood up abruptly, clapping her hands for attention. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, time for the grand finale for our beautiful Hannah." The house lights dimmed to a sultry low, and the music shifted to a slow, heavy bass rhythm. A man entered the VIP area. He was dressed in a suit that was sharp and tailored. He looked more like a high-stakes executive than a dancer. His confidence was palpable as he made a beeline for their table. He extended a hand to Hannah with a smile that was equal parts charm and danger. "May I have this dance?" he asked, his voice smooth enough to make her cheeks burn. Vanessa practically shoved her out of the booth. "Go. It's your night, Hannah." Hannah surrendered to the momentum. The man led her to the center of the room, his movements fluid and professional. As they moved, he leaned in close, his lips brushing against her ear. "Relax," he whispered. "It's going to be fun. I just want you to let go tonight." The room erupted in applause, but for Hannah, the faces of her friends were now just a smear of color. When the dance ended, he guided her toward a private room in the back, and in her alcohol-soaked haze, she did not pull away. Her memory was reduced to flashes, his face too close, his fingers on her arm, and his voice whispering things she could not decode. "It's all good," he kept saying. Jake burst into the gym, barely making it in time for his scheduled session. His day had been a grinder, back-to-back conference calls, endless logistical debates about the wedding with Hannah via text, and a general sense of burnout. Lifting was his only non-negotiable outlet, the only place to bleed off the stress. Brian, his workout partner, was already warming up at the bench press. "Well, if it is not the groom-to-be," Brian teased, racking the bar. "How's the panic level? 2 months out, man. You about to trade these dumbbells for diaper bags." "Hilarious," Jake smirked, dropping his gym bag and sitting on the bench. "For the record, the 5-year plan includes 0 diapers. We good." Yeah. "We'll talk in a year," Brian winked and went back to his set. A few minutes later, they were joined by Tyler, a guy Brian knew from the local circuit. Tyler was one of those guys who walked around with a permanent, self-satisfied grin, the kind of guy who knew his charm worked on 99% of the population. Jake, already on edge, focused on his reps, trying to tune out Tyler's overwhelming energy. "Yo Tyler, tell Jake about that wild gig you were talking about," Brian suggested while spotting Jake on the bench. "Oh dude, it was epic," Tyler started, leaning against the weight rack with a smirk. "We had this bachelorette party at the Velvet Room last night. These girls, they completely went off the rails. Champagne everywhere, dancing on tables, and I'm not even getting into what happened in the private rooms." "A bachelorette party?" Jake sat up, wiping sweat from his forehead. His voice was casual, but a small alarm bell pinged in the back of his mind. "Yeah, one of those nights where it ends with a lot more than just dancing," Tyler laughed, adjusting his grip on the pull-up bar. "Probably the wildest booking I've had all month." "Who were they?" Jake asked. He tried to sound indifferent, just making conversation, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the barbell. "Does it matter?" "Just clients," Tyler shrugged. Although the bride, she stood out. You do not see girls that beautiful and that available every day. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Jake set the weights down, the clang echoing loudly. His tone had hardened, shifting from gym banter to interrogation. Tyler smirked, looking at Jake like he was deciding whether to share the juicy details. "Okay, look. I do not know who she was, but the vibe was definitely party tonight, repent tomorrow. Let us just say her friends were definitely egging her on. And hey, I am not complaining." Jake tried to force a laugh to mask the tension tightening his chest, but his mind was already racing back to Hannah. He remembered her telling him that Vanessa had pushed for a party, but she had sworn she shut it down. She had promised. But right now, that promise felt flimsy. "You got photos?" Jake asked, keeping his voice dangerously even. "Do I ever?" Tyler grinned, pulling his iPhone out of his pocket. "Clients always want the receipts for the memories." Jake walked closer, his heart thumping in his throat. Tyler started scrolling through his gallery. The first few were standard bachelorette chaos, blurry laughter, dancing, expensive bottles with sparklers. And then Jake saw her. Hannah. She was laughing, her face flushed red with alcohol, her arms draped around a danceress' neck. Tyler did not seem to notice Jake's reaction and kept swiping. The next photo was a punch to the gut, Hannah on her knees in front of a dancer, her friends in the background screaming and cheering. Jake's world stopped. The gym noise faded into static. "You know her?" Tyler asked, finally noticing the blood draining from Jake's face. "That is my fiancée," Jake choked out, the words feeling like jagged glass in his throat. Tyler's face went pale. The smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer panic. His eyes darted around, looking for an exit. "Dude, I did not know. I'm sorry, man. It's just a job." Jake held up a hand, silencing him. His mind was a hurricane of rage, betrayal, and disbelief. He could not be in this room for another second. "Send me those photos," he said quietly, but with an intensity that brooked no argument. Tyler did not hesitate. He tapped the screen with shaking fingers. Jake grabbed his gym bag and walked out into the gray Nashville morning without looking back. The rain that had started hours ago was still coming down in sheets, washing the grime off the sidewalks. He stood under the leaden sky, letting the cold water soak into his shirt, staring at the screen of his phone. "Why?" The question echoed in his skull. He looked at the photos again. Every pixel made the pain sharper. It was not a misunderstanding. It was not a rumor. It was the truth, staring him in the face, undeniable and ugly. He had to decide what to do next. But how do you make a decision when the foundation of your life has just been dynamited? Jake unlocked the door to their apartment and stepped inside, leaving wet boot prints on the hardwood floor. The rain was still hammering against the windows, but he could not feel the cold or the dampness anymore. He was numb. The entire drive home, he had rehearsed what he would say, trying to find words that could encompass the storm raging inside him. Hannah was in the kitchen, as usual. She was prepping dinner, the picture of domestic tranquility. When she saw Jake, she offered a tentative smile, but it froze instantly when she saw the look on his face. "Jake? What's wrong?" Her voice was soft, but laced with immediate anxiety. He stood silently in the doorway, his eyes cold, dead. He looked at her like she was a stranger. Without a word, he pulled out his phone, unlocked the screen, and thrust it toward her. Hannah frowned, confused. She took the phone tentatively and looked down. Her face went sheet white. The photos did not lie. She recognized herself, the laughter, the dancing, the man who was too close, too familiar. She swiped quickly, panic rising, and her eyes widened in horror as she saw the more compromising shots. "What is this?" Her voice trembled, barely a whisper. "That is what you are going to explain to me. Right now," Jake said. His voice was low, terrifyingly controlled. It was worse than if he had screamed. "Jake, this is not what you think," she stammered, the classic defense crumbling before it even left her lips. I did not mean to. It was just... I had too much to drink and things just got out of hand." "Just what, Hannah?" He took a step forward, his gaze pinning her against the counter. "Just accidentally ended up at the Velvet Room? Accidentally ended up with that guy? Or was it an accident that your friends decided to film the whole thing in 4K? Jake, I did not know it would go that far." Her voice cracked, tears spilling over as she pressed a hand to her mouth. "Vanessa, she talked me into it. It was a mistake. I never wanted to hurt you. A mistake." Jake let out a short, bitter laugh. "A mistake is putting the milk in the cupboard instead of the fridge. A mistake is forgetting to pay the electric bill. This is a choice, Hannah. This is betrayal." She stepped toward him, reaching out, desperate to bridge the gap. "Please, let me explain. It was one night. I was drunk, I lost control. But it meant nothing. Jake, I love you. You love me." He shook his head, stepping back to avoid her touch as if she were contagious. "If you loved me, how could you do this? You promised me there would be no bachelorette party. You swore I could trust you. And this is what I get?" Hannah reached out again, but he recoiled. "I made a mistake," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "But this does not have to ruin everything. We can fix this. I will do anything to make you believe me again." Jake looked down at her. His face was stone, but his eyes were burning. He felt the anger cresting like a wave, but he held it back, refusing to give her the satisfaction of an explosion. "Fix it?" he whispered. "And how exactly do you plan to fix this, Hannah? Delete the photos? Reboot my trust? Give me back the last 5 years where I thought I was marrying a woman who was honest with me?" She stayed silent, tears streaming down her face, no defense left to offer. "Do you have any idea what it felt like to see that?" His voice broke, the hurt finally bleeding through the anger. "I trusted you. I thought we were building something real. And you took a sledgehammer to it for one night of fun?" Hannah collapsed to her knees, burying her face in her hands. "I know I messed up. I destroyed everything," she sobbed, her voice muffled by her palms. "But please, just give me a chance to fix it. I am begging you." Jake looked down at her, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He wanted to scream, to throw something, to unload the toxic mix of rage and humiliation burning in his chest. But instead, a cold, hollowing emptiness washed over him. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice quiet but hard as granite. "We are going to your parents' house. And you are going to tell them. Everything. Me and them." Hannah snapped her head up, her eyes wide with panic. "Jake, please no, do not do that. This is not a negotiation," he cut her off, his tone steel. "If you want even a fraction of a chance that I will ever listen to you again, you will do this." He turned on his heel and walked into the bedroom, slamming the door shut, leaving her crumpled on the living room floor. Behind the door, he leaned his forehead against the painted drywall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The foundation of his life, everything he knew, everything he believed in, was covered in hairline cracks, ready to shatter. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains, but for Hannah, the day began in pitch darkness. She had not slept, spending the night curled in a fetal ball on the couch, her thoughts looping like a corrupted file. The flashbacks of the previous night burned worse than any punishment Jake could invent. He was right. She had taken a sledgehammer to their life. She heard him moving around the apartment. Every footstep echoed in her chest. Usually, Jake started his mornings with a podcast or a Spotify playlist, humming while he made coffee. Today, the silence was heavy, oppressive. Hannah took a deep, shaky breath, peeled herself off the couch, and walked into the kitchen. Jake stood by the island, gripping a mug of black coffee. He was staring out the window at the Nashville skyline, his posture rigid. "Jake," she started, her voice barely a whisper. He turned, and her heart stalled. His eyes were cold, void of the warmth she had woken up to for 5 years. It was like looking at a stranger. "You ready?" he asked. His voice was so flat it was terrifying. "Ready." Hannah blinked, her brain misfiring. "For your parents," he clarified, taking a sip of coffee. "You did not think I forgot?" Her hands started to tremble. She had hoped that a night of sleep might soften him, that they could table the conversation. But Jake was locked in. "Jake, please. I do not want to drag them into this. This is our business," she tried to keep her voice soft, pleading, but it cracked at the end. "Ours?" He scoffed, setting the mug down on the granite counter with a sharp clack. "Hannah, you voided the ours part of this deal when you betrayed me. This is not just our business anymore. It's a blast radius." "Jake, I know I made a mistake." She started, but he cut her off. "You did not just make a mistake, Hannah. You nuked everything we built. And now you do not want your parents to know? Are you scared of their judgment? Or just ashamed?" His words were like lashes, tearing her apart. She felt tears welling up again, hot and stinging, but she forced herself to hold it together. "I'll tell them," she whispered. "If that's what you need." "It's not about what I need," Jake replied. "It's about what you have to do." The drive to the suburbs was excruciating. Jake drove, his eyes fixed on I-65, his hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2. Hannah tried to speak once, but the words died in the frigid atmosphere of the car. When they pulled into the driveway of her parents' colonial-style home in Franklin, her mom, Anne, was already on the porch, waving with a bright smile. Her dad, Dan, poked his head out from behind his wife. "Jake." "Hannah." And hugged them both, completely oblivious to the radioactive tension radiating off them. "We are so glad you came by. Come on in, I just pulled a peach cobbler out of the oven." They walked into the living room. Jake sat on the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly between his knees. Hannah lingered near the doorway, her breathing shallow. She knew this was going to be the worst conversation of her life. "Is everything okay?" Dan asked, his dad radar finally picking up on the strange vibe. "Yeah," Jake spoke before she could. "Hannah has something she needs to tell you." And frowned, her smile fading into confusion. "Hannah? Honey, what's wrong?" She looked at her daughter, who was staring at the floorboards. Hannah inhaled sharply, trying to dislodge the lump in her throat. Jake leaned forward, his gaze heavy on her. "Tell them," he said firmly. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She finally spoke, her voice thin and brittle. "I made a mistake, a huge mistake," she began. "At the Bachelorette party. I did things I should not have done. It was betrayal." And pressed a hand to her chest, her eyes widening. "Betrayal? What on earth do you mean?" Dan asked, his voice dropping an octave, becoming stern. Hannah choked, tears spilling over her cheeks. "I was drunk, and I let myself cross lines." Her parents sat in stunned silence, trying to process the confession. And slowly sat down next to Dan, her face draining of color. "Jake," and turned to him, her voice trembling. What happens now?" Jake stood up. His face remained an unreadable mask. "I do not know about the long term," he said. "But right now, I know one thing, the wedding is off." The words hung in the air like smoke. Hannah felt her heart shatter. Her parents looked paralyzed. Jake looked at her, his eyes cold and final. "I'll give you 24 hours to get your things out of the apartment," he said. "I need you gone. I need time to think." He turned and walked out the front door, leaving Hannah standing there with her parents and the wreckage of her life. Hannah returned to the apartment for the final time. In a numb, mechanical trance, she packed the remnants of her life into cardboard boxes, leaving behind the books Adi bought her and the memories of the future they'd planned. By the time the 24-hour deadline hit, she was gone. Over the next few days, Hannah tried to pull the scattered pieces of her life back together. Moving into her parent house in Franklin felt like a regression into a past life she had long outgrown. Every corner of the house was a minefield of childhood memories, reminding her of a girl who once believed in high school sweethearts and Hallmark endings. Her mom, did her best to play the comforter, constantly hovering with mugs of tea and unsolicited advice. "It'll get easier, honey," Anne said softly, sliding a steaming cup of Earl Grey across the kitchen island. "You made a mistake, but we learn from these things. They make us stronger." Hannah stared into the swirling tea, unable to swallow the sentiment. Stronger? No. She felt brittle, like glass that had already shattered and was now being ground into dust. Meanwhile, Jake was systematically deleting her from his existence. The Zola wedding website they had spent weeks perfecting was gone, replaced by a 404 error. The date in her digital calendar, the one that used to pulse with excitement, was now just a blank hollow square. Every time she worked up the courage to text him, the blue bubble sat there, unacknowledged, until she eventually deleted the thread in a fit of despair. Through mutual friends, the news trickled back to her: he had pulled the plug on everything. The venue deposit was forfeited, the florist cancelled, even the Delta tickets for their honeymoon in St. Bart's had been voided. Vanessa also tried to reach out. After ignoring a dozen calls and a barrage of "you okay?" texts, Hannah finally picked up, her voice as cold as a Nashville winter. "What do you want, Vanessa?" "Hannah, look, I just wanted to say I am so sorry. I had no idea things would spiral like this. It was just supposed to be a joke. A little fun." "A joke?" Hannah cut her off, the bitterness sharp in her throat. "You call this a joke? Do you have any clue what I've actually lost? My home, my future, my person. It's all gone." There was nothing but static on the other end of the line. "I see not do this with you right now," Hannah said, her voice trembling. "Maybe not ever." She hung up before Vanessa could respond and blocked the number. Things took a darker turn when the rumor mill started churning on social media. Their mutual friends in the Nashville scene began whispering about why the perfect couple had suddenly imploded. On Instagram and Facebook, the speculation was rampant. Some hinted at infidelity, while others guessed Jake just got cold feet at the 11th hour. But the ugly specific truth remained a radioactive secret, known only to the two of them and the silent walls of the Velvet Room. Hannah eventually deactivated her accounts, unable to stomach the sight of engagement announcements or wedding photos from people she used to know. She stopped going out, avoiding the spots in the Gulch or 12, South where she might run into someone she knew. Her days bled into a gray, repetitive routine of silence and regret. And that's where today's story ends. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed it, do not forget to like and comment. We'd love to discuss this story with you. See you in the next video.